Earlier this week, we also launched a loan program through the Maryland Department of Labor to provide low-interest loans to federal workers. And we've worked with our credit unions and banks to offer financial assistance and payment flexibility for Marylanders who have been affected by this shutdown. For people who want to find out more information on these resources and things that the state are doing to support Marylanders, please go to go.md.gov/federal shutdown. And I know people have taken advantage of it because thousands of Marylanders have already started to use these resources since the shutdown began. Within hours of launching our emergency site, we hit over 10,000 views. And in fact, in a week, we have now hit over 45,000 views. We have now received 830 new unemployment insurance claims from federal employees, and we anticipate more coming in the days ahead. So I encourage all Marylanders to take advantage of these emergency resources and seek the support that they are entitled to and the support that Team Maryland wants to ensure that you receive. But I do want to be clear that no state is prepared to fill the enormous gap that is being created by this federal administration. So on behalf of 6.5 million Marylanders, my message to President Trump is the same message that I articulated at the State House last week. Stop attempting to gut health care for working families and end this shutdown now. You're the one causing it. We're the ones feeling it. It needs to end. And now with that, I will turn the program over to Representative Sarah Elfred.
Good morning, and thank you, Governor. I'm so grateful to be here with Team Maryland, Governor Moore, Senators Van Hollen and Alsobrooks, Congressman Mfume and O, my good friend, Senator Pam Vital, and of course, our wonderful Executive Director of BWI. It feels like we're together a lot these days because while the federal government is shut down, Team Maryland has been hard at work. Whether it's the governor announcing new programs and supports, thank you, Governor, for the federal workers who live here in Maryland, or Senator Alsobrooks and I introducing legislation that will ensure that essential employees like the ones here at BWI are eligible for unemployment insurance in any shutdown. Maryland is fighting to reopen the government with a bipartisan budget deal. Again, reopen the government with a bipartisan budget deal that supports our federal employees without gutting health care for 20 million Americans. We're here at BWI today because 550 TSA agents and 70 air traffic controllers, support staff, and management are employed here and currently working without pay as essential employees. And we have a very simple message. Shutdowns don't fly. Our federal workforce directly and acutely feels the impacts of the government shutdown. Right here in Maryland's 3rd District, 44,000 federal employees are working, either essential or at home furloughed. These folks are our neighbors, but they are the ones who keep our skies safe and make sure thousands of Americans can get to where they need to go each and every day. So as the governor said, first and foremost, our message, and I think everybody behind me would agree, is thank you, not just during this shutdown, but thank you for doing your jobs for the last 10 months under the largest assault on federal employees this country has ever seen. Our federal employees are just simply not hearing that thank you enough. And we know that you all perform your jobs that simply cannot be abandoned because of chaos in Washington. Please know that our offices are open and doing everything we can to ease the pain. And that's why we are ready to work with our colleagues on either side of the aisle to reopen the government. But unfortunately, as the governor said, our Republican colleagues have refused to come to the table. We're in the district today because the Speaker has called off votes for the 2nd week in a row, unwilling to negotiate on health care. And as our communities begin to receive notices, those notices went out on October 1st, that their health care premiums are increasing. There's so much at stake right now. 190,000 Marylanders rely on those ACA tax credits, and without Congress acting, 190,000 Marylanders are about to experience a 68%. And even if you don't rely on the ACA tax credits, even if you're not one of those 190,000, all Marylanders are projected to see their premiums increase 13% if Congress doesn't act. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know many neighbors who are anticipating a 13% raise next year to compensate for this surge in health care costs. The governor mentioned it, but it bears repeating. I feel the need to address the president's latest threat to break the law. And I'll repeat, break the law and not provide furloughed and essential workers with the back pay they're legally guaranteed to receive. They are legally guaranteed to receive it because a Maryland senator, former Senator Ben Cardin, sponsored that law, and it is the law, and the president is threatening. And I've said this from the beginning. The president continues to resort to threats that use our federal employees as pawns instead of honestly showing up and to the negotiating table and striking a bipartisan budget deal. I know my Maryland colleagues and I remain steadfast in the fight for our federal workers and for health care for all Americans. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner and friend, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you, Congresswoman Elfred. Thank you for your leadership in Congressional District 3 and on behalf of the state of Maryland. I want to thank our other colleagues in the House who are here, Congressman Mfume, Congressman O. Thank you all for what you're doing to try to reopen the government of the United States, and that's what my partner in the Senate, Senator Alsobrooks, and I are doing. Governor, thank you and your team for all you're doing to try to ease the pain, the unfair burdens that have been placed on federal employees at this time, and it's good to be here with other members of Team Maryland. I also want to salute our patriotic federal employees who go to work every day on behalf of the American people. Here at BWI, Thurgood Marshall, that includes the air traffic controllers, that includes TSA officials, and it includes others. They're part of a federal workforce that delivers for the American people. We are now 8 days into the second Trump shutdown. I say second Trump shutdown because I was in the Senate during the first Trump shutdown, and I think we all remember that. That was in 2018, 2019. It lasted for 35 days. We don't want this shutdown to last a day longer. But we're all here because President Trump has not come to the negotiating table. We call upon him today to join us in bipartisan negotiations to open the government. And the House Republican leadership, they're AWOL. They're not even in town. They are more worried about keeping the Epstein files under lock and key than they are opening the federal government. And in the United States Senate, Senate Republicans have now voted 5 times against the proposal that Senator Alsobrooks and I voted for to open the government without giving Donald Trump a complete blank check for his lawless activities, and also to address an issue that candidate Trump said he was going to focus on day one, which is bringing down the prices and costs that are squeezing every American family and families throughout the state of Maryland. And we're especially focused on the time bomb that Donald Trump and Republicans left in place, that when it explodes later this year will drive up huge costs in health care in Maryland and around the country. You may remember a few months ago they passed what they called the Big Beautiful Bill. It was beautiful if you're a billionaire or very wealthy people. Those individuals had big tax cuts permanently extended. The tax cuts that they allowed to expire are the tax cuts that help middle-class families here in Maryland and around the country afford health care. Those are the ones that are set to terminate, and just this week, Marylanders began to receive their notices about how that would impact them. And yesterday I put out, and others put out, an example of what would happen to a 60-year-old couple in Salisbury, Maryland, that makes $90,000 a year. They would see their current premiums more than double, from $641 a month to $1,762 a month, almost triple. We all know that Donald Trump is not just shutting down the government now. He has been shutting down the government in pieces from day one. We remember Elon Musk said he was going to take a chainsaw, that's his metaphor, not mine, to government services. We've all stood outside the Social Security Administration, where they let people go and made it much harder for people to access their benefits. Russ Vought, who is Donald Trump's right-hand budget man, infamously said that he wanted to inflict trauma on federal employees. And that is what they are doing now. And the most recent example is their big lie that federal employees will not receive their full back pay when the federal government reopens. These are mafia-style threats that have no basis in law. I remember working very closely with Senator Cardin and our Virginia colleagues and others when we passed that law to ensure back pay for all federal employees. And if you go back and look at what the Trump administration said at the time, they recognized that that was not just back pay for that shutdown. It was to make sure that in all shutdowns, federal employees are made whole at the end of the day. And in fact, if you look at the guidance that OPM, the Office of Personnel and Management, just put out in September, it says the same thing until they took it down. So this is fear-mongering that the Trump administration is engaged in that has no basis in law. We want to end this shutdown. I outlined the proposals we've talked about. In the meantime, we are doing everything we can to ease the burden, both the governor and his team at the state level, all of us at the federal level, and I want to close where I began by thanking those federal employees who really work day in and day out to provide those services to the American people. And they'd be the first to tell you, in addition to the pain they're suffering when they're not able to perform those services, the American people end up losing the benefit of those services. So let's end this shutdown, and now let me turn it over to my partner in the Senate, Senator Alsobrooks, who has voted 5 times now on our plan to reopen the government. Senator Alsobrooks.
Good morning, everyone. I, too, am really proud to be standing with Team Maryland this morning. I think the governor said it well when we said we wake up each day and we feel really, really fortunate to be in a state like Maryland. And I do, in fact, with leaders like these who believe in the rights of the American people. And it is also really important that we thank, again, the men and women who show up, the incredible patriots of our country who show up day in and day out. Our federal workers, we are the proud home to over 200,000 federal employees here in the state of Maryland, one of the largest groupings of federal employees in the country. And these are the men and women who show up no matter whether the president is a Democrat or a Republican. I have met the federal employees who have worked for decades inside our government to make sure that our water is clean to drink, the ones who are there to ensure that important research moves forward to cure cancer and Alzheimer's, the ones who make sure they're able to predict hurricanes. And these are the very people that this administration so shamelessly decided that they would attack, in this whole witch hunt against federal employees virtually started on day one. You've already heard Senator Van Hollen say that Russell Vought, whose words echo those of his leader, who are cruel. These people are so cruel. They are so callous. What has been done here, I should go ahead and say it, is so wicked. that they said virtually on day one that it was their intention, this is what Russell Vogt said, that people would feel so traumatized, our federal employees, that they wouldn't even want to come to work. And so the shutting down of the federal government was by design virtually from day one, when the greatest lie that was ever told was that in order to address fraud, waste, and abuse, they would shut down various parts of the government. They decided they wanted to shut down the Department of Education. They said they would they fired employees from, as you've heard, Social Security Administration. And they said that our employees were incompetent, that the reason they wanted to fire them. Now, I can tell you, I've been in hearing rooms with the people who were to be confirmed by this administration, so I know what incompetence looks like firsthand, and it is not our federal employees who have been attacked. But the greatest lie told is not only that we don't need these federal employees and that they are incompetent, but the design of this administration, it should be very clear, is to repurpose government in order to benefit billionaires. So to fire and to gut out these federal agencies, and it has been done with one intention, and that is to repurpose government, not to serve the people, the hard-working middle class and working class people of our country, but it is instead to benefit the billionaire friends of this administration. That is what this is all about. And in this latest episode of this horror story that we have been reading all year long, we have now seen the Republicans shut down our government. And that's an important statement, because the greatest Jedi mind trick that I have been watching is for the Republicans to say the ones who control the White House, the Senate of the United States, and the U.S. House of Representatives now say that the party that is not in the majority is the one that shut down the government. These Republicans who control and who have the keys to the kingdom shut down the federal government rather than support affordable health care for Americans. That's what this is about. They'd rather shut down the government than allow Americans to have access to health care and to have affordable health care. We see the cuts to Medicaid. We've seen also now this ACA tax credit issue, which is a huge issue. If they do not extend it, we know now that millions and millions of Americans will lose their health care in 2026, and we know millions more, up to 24 million more, will see their premiums increase. And this is on top of everything that this administration has done to attack the middle class and working class families by making it more difficult to afford the cost of living. We've seen these horrible tariffs that will cause the cost of goods to increase. We've seen also the cost of groceries have increased by about 3% just this year alone. And so it flies in the face of everything they promised, which was to make our lives better. And I want to ask the question, has it gotten better yet? Under this administration, whose life has gotten better yet? Has it become easier to afford the cost of living? Of course not. The mood of the country, none of us can remember the mood of the country being as angry and sad as it's been. And this is all at the hands of these Republicans who have refused again to side with the American people, to make our cost of living such that people can afford to live. And when they didn't get their way, what did they do? They shut down the government. And so we've heard from our employees here, federal employees, my constituents, who I want to thank for all that they have endured. Many of whom have said, you know what, we want you to reopen the government. And we have, as Senator Van Hollen has said, we have voted now 5 different times to not shut down the government and to roll back these Medicaid cuts and to make sure that we are extending the Affordable Care Premium Tax Credit so that Americans can simply afford their health insurance. But these employees have said, you know what, we want you to stand strong, open the government, and please protect our health care so that we can afford to be able to take care of our families. So I am going to hand over now the microphone to Congressman Mfume. And again, I want to thank so much all of my colleagues who are standing here for the work. We're going to continue to work on behalf of Marylanders and do everything in our power to ensure that they are able to care for themselves and to care for their families.
I know you've been looking to hear something different, but the fact of the matter is we're deliberately redundant because the truth needs to be repeated over and over again. I want to thank Governor Moore for this emergency effort as an executive order to provide forbearance and to provide monetary relief to those persons in our state who are really up against the wall as a result of this Republican shutdown. And I want to thank all of my colleagues who are here, both our senior and junior senator, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Alsobrooks. I want to thank Sarah Elfred for convening us here in this district to underscore just how dangerous these cuts can be, particularly when we talk about air safety. I want to thank our executive director and CEO of the airport and our great supporter here and others who have come out to be with us. Sarah, Johnny, and myself on the House side have been fighting day in and day out to do one thing, and that was to avoid a shutdown. This shutdown was totally avoidable, but the Republicans are fearful that if they convene us, the 218th signature will go on a discharge petition, and all of the information about Jeffrey Epstein will at last be released. This has a lot to do with a lot of things, but don't underestimate the need for them to protect those who were associated with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, when I say avoidable, you would think that most people would not want to punish other people by increasing their health care by 10, 20, 50, or even 100% in some cases. You would think that. You would believe that this government would stop lacking compassion, particularly in the Oval Office, and find a way to unite people, even though we disagree on basic aspects of this approach. And you would think also that for those persons who are not going to be able to replace the cuts they're going to receive as a result of Medicare, and for those who are going to watch their ACA payments go up, that at the very, very least, the President and members of the Congress on both sides of the aisle would be compassionate enough to pull back from that. But that is not the case. And so the reason it wasn't avoidable was because the Republicans wanted to get out of town. And when you're out of town, you can't negotiate. And we've been in Washington day after day after day after day, waiting to try to have dialogue and discussion. And the Speaker of the House refuses to convene us. I think that's a sin. That they've got to do that, and they won't see that pay until after this is all over. And they put at risk the safety of the American public, not because they don't care. They've been working around the clock. The executive director and I spoke about this weeks back, about the burden on air traffic controllers and others at this airport. But they do their job. They get up every day, they put on their clothes, they come to work, and they don't ask, as Angela said, is the president a Democrat or a Republican? They just want to do what's right. They want to fulfill their obligation. So, Mr. Speaker, while this is underway, at the very least, come back to Washington, convene us so that we might be able to put forward and pass an emergency supplemental aimed at finding a way to pay air traffic controllers all over this country until this thing is settled. At the very least, Mr. Speaker, don't continue to put at risk the lives of Americans who are flying day in and day out. The failure of the Speaker to act while this is going on is just as bad as the shutdown that we've seen. And to Mr. Vogt, who continues to want to intimidate men and women who are federal employees as if he is Al Capone, your day is coming, sir. You will be held accountable one day for these decisions. And that's why, so desperately, the other side will do everything they can to prevent the House from flipping from Republican to Democratic, because they know they will be held in account. And so I'm proud to be with all of the persons here. I'm proud to see that there's so many air traffic controllers and TSA agents and others who are working at this airport. I'm proud of our director's effort to not let this slow her down. And I'm proud of Americans all over this country who are concerned about health care and who are concerned about their country and who believe at the end of the day we can do more. We can do more. And so when historians look back through the telescope of time and they look at this era in our nation's history, let it be said of us, those who are proud Democrats who have stood up and will continue to stand up, that we will not waver, that we will not flinch, that we will not bend, and we will not break in terms of fighting for what's right for the American people. Please welcome our colleague in the House who has been so hard at work with Sarah and myself on this, Congressman Johnny Olszewski.
Good morning, everyone. I have just a few thanks to give, and then I'll raise 3 points to conclude us this morning. First, my deepest thanks to the men and women who are federal employees across this country, the people who are keeping our airports open, just like here at BWI, who are showing up to work in our military, at Social Security, the Department of Education, trying to meet the needs of their fellow Americans while their pay is being withheld. I want to thank Governor Moore and his team and his partners, people like our amazing Executive Director and Senator Bidel, who are, with great care and compassion, Governor Moore and his team and his partners are meeting the need of fellow Marylanders in this moment when they're being left behind by this administration. And I want to thank Team Maryland. I want to thank our Senators Van Hollen and Alsobrooks for proving that there is a way that we can meet the need of the healthcare challenge. We can prevent the tax hike that Republicans are pushing and reopen this government. They've proved it 5 times now. And I want to thank my colleagues in the House, Representatives Mfume and Elfred, for their leadership in also pushing to keep this government open and to meet the needs of the American people. The 3 points I'll make to conclude today are: 1, federal employees are not political pawns. And we've seen first an administration that has already fired over 15,000 Marylanders, the most in this country, then turning to threaten to fire even more during a shutdown. It's so far out of the norm, but then again, this is a president that loves to live outside of our norms. It's followed up by clear violation of the law. This must be a president who has amnesia. He's forgotten a bill that he himself signed. Our Speaker has forgotten that he himself voted for legislation that Senator Cardin and Van Hollen supported, that Representative Mfume and Speaker Johnson, as I said, voted for. These workers are the backbone of our country. They should not be politicized, just as we shouldn't be threatened with cuts to green infrastructure projects across this country, especially those states that just happen to be led by Democrats. Second, these impacts go beyond our federal workers. While they are feeling the brunt of this shutdown, we know that there are implications at places like BWI. We saw it in Nashville and in airports across the country yesterday. The American people are suffering too, because they can't get access to questions about their student loans, to questions about their Social Security and their veteran benefits. It's wrong, and we need to end the shutdown. And third, we can't end the shutdown if we're not talking to each other. And as my colleagues have pointed out, Speaker Johnson has skipped out of town and told Republicans not to show up, so that we can't even meet the need and support people during the shutdown, as Representative Mfume pointed out. So I'm calling on the President, Republican leaders, to come back to the table, to join my colleagues, so that we can address this health care crisis, and it is a crisis, and to reopen this government in a responsible and bipartisan way. And with that, I will turn things back over to our host here in District 3, Congressman Sir Elfred, to lead with Q&A.
Thank you, Congressman Olszewski. We'll take questions.
But they're saying, look, the risks to them are too great to continue this. So
Well, I'll turn to the senators to talk about the CR. The thing that I know is this, is that what the president initiated last week is not a deviation, it's a continuation. Because this is what's been going on for the past 9 months. You know, since Donald Trump has taken office, he has now fired over 15,000 Marylanders who are federal workers. Over 15,000. That's the largest number in this entire country. That since Donald Trump has become the President of the United States, we have seen how grants have been pulled from our institutions, how Donald Trump has attempted to shutter federal agencies, how Donald Trump has now tried to, in many cases illegally, try to cancel projects that were set to come to the state of Maryland. So this is not some type of new day deviation where the president can stand on a hill and say, well, I'm just trying to keep government open, when that's a direct deviation from what he's been doing for the past 9 months. This assault on our federal workers is ongoing from the President of the United States. So I'm thankful that we have a federal delegation that's standing firm and saying a prerequisite for keeping the federal government open should not be raising premiums by 70%. That a prerequisite for keeping government open should not be cutting people off of health care. Because if that's what keeping government open means in the world of Donald Trump, then I think all of us have a very real problem with that interpretation of what keeping government open actually means and looks like. But
Thank you, Governor. The governor had it exactly right as to what's happening. In addition to the fact that we're going to face this big explosion in healthcare costs that will hit people across Maryland and across the country, we cannot give a lawless president a blank check to continue to do what he has been doing from day one. Firing federal employees. I met yesterday with federal employees who'd been fired in the first couple months of this administration. Their cases are winding their way through the courts. Some courts have already found that some of those firings are illegal. And as the governor said, they are withholding funds, very important funds in the state of Maryland and around the country, that were part of the earlier agreements that we all voted for. You know, the Constitution doesn't allow the president to cherry pick what parts of the law he will enforce and where he will make those investments and where he will not. In Maryland, there are many places where the last agreements we reached meant that investment should be made on a whole variety of issues. There's a FEMA grant worth about $36 million for Crisfield to help them prepare for the next hurricanes. They're not funding that. That's just one example. So you have to have an agreement that is worth the paper it's written on. And if you look at our proposal, that is part of our proposal. Simply making clear that President Trump cannot illegally withhold funds after an agreement is reached. And I will just close by saying Senator Alsobrooks and I held a telephone town hall meeting just 2 nights ago. We got a very different message from federal employees on that call, because they have been the victims of Russ Vought's efforts to traumatize federal employees. They're the ones that they're threatening to withhold their back pay when the government reopens, which, as we've said, is flat out illegal. They're the ones that they're threatening to fire now out of pure vindictiveness and spite. Right? On the one hand, President Trump and Russ Vought are saying, let's reopen the government to provide services to the American people. We agree. At the same time, they're saying they're going to go out and fire federal employees. In other words, deny the American people the benefit of those services permanently. And I want to be clear, that also is illegal. The president has less power when the government is shut down to fire more federal employees than they do in normal times. And in normal times, they've already been violating the law. So I just wanted to point out that we all want to get the government open. but we also want to make sure it's worth the paper it's written on, and we do want to deal with this ticking time bomb on healthcare costs in America.
I just want to add one point. The fact is, the question was, why wouldn't we vote for a continuing resolution? We have. And I think that's really important for the American people to hear that. We absolutely have voted 5 different times to open the government. The real question is, why won't the Republicans vote with us to open the government and to avoid these Medicaid cuts and the failure to extend the ACA tax credits that would cause people to not be able to either afford their health care or shut off access to health care. You know, we are really representing everyone. The thing that's really mind-blowing about what we're seeing is Republicans are hurting their own constituents. The people who suffer as a result of these health care increases are people in red states. In our own state, we have the greatest concentration, some of the greatest concentration of Medicaid recipients are in the reddest parts of our state. We also have it in some of the bluer parts. So in other words, this is not a partisan issue. People of both parties are harmed. Almost all Americans, this is what we're talking about, will see these health care increases that most people cannot afford and will have to just do without their insurance. So what we're saying is we want the government to open, but we also happen to believe that it is immoral to have people without health care. I can't understand what happened. The moral center of our country is being decimated right now. It is immoral, cruel, and inhumane what they are doing. And so the real question is, what's wrong with our colleagues on the other side, these Republicans, who know this is wrong, who know it's wrong, and are going along with it anyway, harming their own constituents. Their own constituents need these health care ACA tax credits, and they need the Medicaid.
Questions? Yes.
One of the reasons, yes, to answer your question, it does put pressure on both sides of the argument. But one of the main things that I mentioned earlier is that I'm calling on the Speaker of the House, who's the Speaker over Democrats and Republicans, to find a way to convene us, since they have gotten out of town the last 10 days and refused to talk, so that we could talk about creating an emergency supplemental appropriation, separate and apart from everything else, to be able to make sure that air traffic controllers around this country are not in the situation they're in, that they're being paid. And yes, they are essential. And yes, we have an obligation to make sure that the skies are safe. People are beginning now to worry about flying. And we should never, as a nation, get to that point. So I would hope that the Speaker and the leadership in the Senate, quite frankly, as long as there is continuing negotiations or gridlock, would look at the idea of an emergency supplemental to be able to pay those men and women that keep our skies safe.
You know, when we learned about the situation and the unfortunate, the really heartbreaking situation of a young person taking their own life, I mean, obviously it strikes at all of our souls. We know that, and while we cannot comment on active investigations, we also know that systems have got to be fixed. You know, we know that as we continue to see, even with most recent audits, that some of the challenges that we've seen within DHS, they've been long-standing. You know, we knew when we came on board 2.5 years ago that of the many functions and the many departments within state government that had been broken, that one of the ones that we had to pay the most attention to was DHS, and we continue to do that work. But while many of the challenges that had begun under the department began before our administration came on board, our administration has a firm commitment, and I am placing firm accountability on all of our people to make sure that we will use our time here in office to fix them. And so we know that the systems that need to be addressed both in DHS and other state departments, that it becomes a core responsibility of us to ensure that they are addressed.
I don't see any other questions. I just want to, oh, yes.
Can't hear you.
Significant impact to the BWI operations. No, thank you for your question. No, there have been no significant impacts to BWI operations. Our message here is thanking our TSA agents and our air traffic controllers who were already on a thin staff prior to this, but they're showing up each and every day and doing their work. I just want to say the urgency of this moment, and Congressman Mfume mentioned it, the House has been called out. The Speaker sent the Republicans home on vacation for the last 2 weeks. I'm heading to Washington right after this. We are ready and willing to negotiate a bipartisan deal, and the urgency of this healthcare crisis is right now. The Speaker has said, why don't we negotiate in 7 weeks? Our constituents can't wait 7 weeks. Their letters with their premium increases are already at their mailboxes right now. The insurance companies are not going to wait 7 weeks for Congress to get itself together. We have to act now, and that's why I'm so proud of Team Maryland for continuing to press this issue and continuing to be willing and ready to work with anybody who's really ready and willing to work with us to reopen the government with a bipartisan budget deal that protects the health care of tens of millions of Americans. Thank you.